The echo of a single gunshot shattered Harbor Point's fog, and night folded in on itself, as if ashamed. Detective Emma Cole said, "Nobody moves until I see the angles," and her breath curled like ribbon in the cold. Sirens rounded the warehouses, blue strobe slicing mist, while gulls rose screaming from the pilings. Laura Bennett lay beside a crate stamped with foreign ports, her blouse neat, her blood a precise crescent, like a signature. Emma knelt and said, "This is staged," and the word drifted out over black water. Noah Pierce slid under the tape and said, "Your city is trending," and she grimaced at the taste of metal in the air. Captain Richard Monroe said, "Control the optics," and his voice sanded the edge of grief. The harbor clock tolled once, and Emma's jaw locked against an old memory she would not feed. She traced the bullet groove in the oak and said, "A silent patron paid for this." A phone buzzed near the body, face down, screen ghosting a missed call. Emma said Laura called for help, and thunder muttered from the horizon. Nearby chains clinked like distant applause, and the fog swallowed their faces. Dawn did not arrive so much as bargain, and Emma stood in the incident room with damp hair coiled tight. She said, "Jurisdiction stays here," and a dozen eyes pretended to agree. Photos of Laura Bennett glowed on the board, angles clean, wounds tidily cruel. The mise prelam read like a boast, a single entry, no struggle, no noise. Emma said, "We're not chasing chaos, we're chasing choreography." Monroe paced and said, "Keep the press hungry, not fed," and she logged the words with a tired grin. Noah texted, a link blooming with guesses, and she typed, "Stay outside the tape or I start quoting policy." A map of Harbor Point lit with pins that fell into a straight line, like a metronome. Emma said, "He planned exits, maybe rehearsed," and the room shifted with unease. Coffee steamed into the AC's winter breath, and the hum sharpened her focus. She said, "Find cameras that fail perfectly," and the silence answered like a dare. The interview room smelled of old coffee and apologies, and Jason Bennett folded his hands like he could keep time from moving. Emma said, "Tell me about last night," and he stared at the recorder as if it might forgive him. He said, "Laura asked for a ride, then canceled," and his voice tripped on cancel as if the word were a cliff. Emma watched his pulse flutter and said, "You knew about the debts," and he flinched like a door in wind. He said, "She promised it was handled," and the promise hovered like smoke. A tear tracked his cheek, honest or practiced, and Emma's doubt bit down hard. She slid a photo across and said, "This line means precision," and he whispered, "She liked things neat." The clock ticked, and the air thinned, and the room remembered other failures. Emma said, "If you protect someone, they will not protect you," and his eyes sank into the table grain. The message hit Emma's phone like a pebble through water. Unknown number, one sentence that refused to blink. She read, "She hid it where the city hums," and the phrase turned the room colder. Emma said, "Anonymous wants a chase," and Noah replied, "Anonymous wants a headline." She walked the pier where the transformers groaned, and the wind stitched frost into her scarf. She said, "Hums means power, means grid," and her boots counted boards toward the substation fence. A padlock showed fresh scratches, tidy as dental work, and her smile arrived without permission. She said, "He speaks in neatness," and the gulls answered with laughter that wasn't friendly. A camera above the gate blinked dead, and she tasted copper at the thought of timing. She texted the team, "Warrant now," and slid a glance at the water. The tide kept its own secrets, churning like a lie rehearsed too long. Back in her apartment, the city murmured through the radiator like a confession half done. Emma set Laura's locket on the table and said, "You were tidy even when dying," and the words felt like a vow she had borrowed. She opened her old case file, the one that still bled at the edges, and the photos met her with stale light. She said, "I won't fail this time," and the room tested her with silence. Rain braided the window, and the siren far below dragged a red thread across her wall. She called Noah and said, "If I fall, publish everything," and he said, "Don't fall." She called Monroe and said, "I need the warrant now," and he said, "Need is negotiable." She smiled without warmth and wrote 3 names she could not yet prove. The pen bit the paper, steady as a heart deciding. She said, tomorrow. I turned the city over, and the radiator sighed like it believed her. Morning bled into the lab like a weak apology, and the fluorescence made every truth look cold. Emma Cole said, walk me through precision, and the me slid a ruler beside the wound. He said, single entry, subsonic, close, no cavitation, and the words felt rehearsed. Emma traced the neat margins on the photo and said, a technician, not a brawler. The ballistic gel test sat like a pale ghost on steel, and the slug nested without drama. The me, said he timed her heartbeat, and Emma felt a door open in her memory. She said, metronome thinking, and the lab hum answered with indifference. Powder tests came back clean, and gloves glinted in a tray like silver fish. Emma said, he left no breath on the scene, and the room agreed by staying still. The surveillance map showed synchronized gaps like winks from a liar. She said, kill at 1:58, exit by 2:3, and the numbers locked like handcuffs. The me said he practiced, and Emma nodded because practice is the closest twin to faith. She said, find a range that rents silence, and the printer spat forms like snow. The financials crawled across Emma's screen like ants that knew the kitchen. She said, charity up front, debt in the alley, and Laura's ledgers rolled with tidy columns. Noah Pierce said, public halo, private hemorrhage, and his message carried an unasked favor. Emma clicked into a donation shell that mirrored a city vendor, and the loop tightened. She said, she paid someone to make noise stop, and the cursor blinked like a held breath. A bank manager folded into caution and said, court order, and Emma logged the stall. She said, file it, and Monroe's name hovered in the request like a storm. He called and said, temper expectations, and she listened to the smile she did not trust. Calendar sync revealed Laura's late meetings, with an unknown initial. Emma said, initials are masks, and she built a timeline with pins that stood like soldiers. The pattern pulled toward Harbor Point again, and the city map felt complicit. She said, her daylight was clean, her nights were beveled, and the lines stuck. Noah said, I can nudge a whistle, and she replied, bring proof or stay away. The docks after midnight looked like a sentence that chose not to end. How? Emma said, you owe me a clean lead, and Noah stood beside a stack of pallets with pocketed hands. He said, check the waterline camera at berth C, and the fog accepted the secret. Emma moved with the tide's slow confidence, and her penlight met a lens that blinked dead on schedule. She said, failure that performs on cue, and Noah exhaled a laugh he could not keep. A barge horn rolled through their ribs, and the planks answered with damp groans. Emma said, who told you this? And Noah said, a voice that hates microphones. She crouched and lifted a taped bundle wedged beneath a rail. The plastic held a ledger slice, and a timetable stamped in red. She said, he rehearsed arrivals, and the pages smelled like engine rooms. Noah said, you're welcome, and she said, you're on the hook now. A shadow crossed the crane, unhurried and certain, and the night contracted. Emma said, we are seen, and the river kept speaking in dark vowels. Day broke like cheap glass, and the courthouse smelled of paper and pride. Emma said, warrant for the substation logs, and the clerk arranged her face into neutrality. Captain Monroe arrived with a folder that wore authority like armor. He said, chain is smudged, judge will balk, and the hall took his side with its marble echo. Emma said, we preserve, we proceed, and he smiled like a man admiring a painting. He said, optics over outcome, and the phrase felt like bleach in her lungs. She held up the timetable and said, pattern beats optics, and the clerk shifted weight. Monroe leaned close and said, take the long road, and his breath carried winter. Emma said, Laura took the long road, and it killed her, and the clerk glanced at the clock. The judge delayed, citing completeness, and the page stamped tomorrow like a shrug. Monroe said, you see, patience works, and she catalogued the angle of his pleasure. Emma said, delay is a weapon, and he said, only if you let it cut. She walked out with a copy that felt smaller than the truth. The cafe's bell chimed like a polite lie, and steam turned the air into soft weather. Emma said, "Evelyn Park," and the barista's hands paused over a chrome pitcher. Evelyn Park said regular, and the word arrived already leaving. Emma set Laura's photo on the counter, and the milk hissed like a warning. She said, "You served her last night," and Evelyn's eyes found the exit, and stayed there. Noah sat 2 stools away, silent as a witness who knew the rules. Evelyn said, "I close at 10, and Emma said she left at 11. The drips counted seconds, and guilt tried to hide in foam art. Emma said, "She trusted you," and Evelyn flinched like a pulled stitch. A to-go cup clacked down with more force than needed, and the door swung in a draft. Evelyn said, "I see faces, not clocks," and the room decided not to believe her. Emma slid the photo closer, and Evelyn backed up with the cup as shield. She said, "I have deliveries," and the back door answered for her by opening. The flash drive lay on Emma's desk like a dare black plastic, unmarked, weightless but heavy in consequence. She said, "Let's see who drops ghosts," and slotted it, screen blooming redacted calendars. Each line was a shadow, meetings blanked, initials cut out like surgical removals. "Noah," said anonymous, "hates sunlight," and his reflection blurred in the glass. Emma whispered, "Anonymous loves control," and the cursor crawled across timestamps that circled Harbor Point. A file opened on its own, glitching like it wanted to be caught. Emma said, "Somebody wants us to think we're clever," and her chest burned with the old wound of being played. A knock tapped the door, soft like guilt rehearsed, and Jason lingered with a look that carried apology. He said, "Laura was afraid of her phone," and Emma leaned back, blood gone cold. Noah muttered, "Phones are leashes," and Emma wrote it down without comment. She said, "Fear that neat doesn't spill alone," and the flash drive's fan hummed like a warning too late. The hospital corridors stretched sterile and endless, and Dr. Victor Hale adjusted his cufflinks like the night had been designed for him. Emma said, "You knew Laura," and his smile arrived too quickly. He said, "She trusted my clinic," and the words perched on air too light. She measured the pause between his phrases and said, "Your clinic's hours and her ledger hours overlap." His laugh was a glass breaking slowly. He said, "Correlation isn't guilt." And Emma said, "But patterns are blood." Hale's eyes carried charm lacquered over distance, and the hall lights hummed judgment. Nurses passed without slowing, their shoes whispering neutrality. Emma said, "Your fibers showed up on the docks," and he said, "So do seagulls." She let silence stretch until his jaw twitched. The elevator dinged, and he turned with elegance rehearsed. Emma whispered, "You're too clean," and her notebook closed like a gavel. Hale said, "And you're too hungry," before the doors cut his face in two. The newsroom's hum was caffeine and conflict, and Noah leaned across his desk with eyes alight. Emma said, "You published without clearance," and his smirk folded into apology he didn't mean. He said, "Sunlight disinfects," and she snapped, "It also blinds." His screen ran headlines that bled precision murder into rumor, and her hands itched for control. Noah said, "People listen when fear is dressed sharp," and Emma said, "People die when fear is dressed cheap." Their words ricocheted, sharp and bright, while reporters passed like ghosts. He leaned closer and whispered, "If we choke the story, the killer owns it," and she stopped breathing for one beat. Emma said, "If we rush it, the killer steers it," and her voice dropped into gravel. Noah smiled thin and said, "We're both right and both wrong," and Emma hated that he meant it. The newsroom lights flickered, buzzing like nerves, and she realized ethics were as sharp as knives. Evidence room dust smelled like betrayal, and Emma flipped through logs that stuttered with gaps. She said, "We logged it at midnight," and the chain ended at 0:15 with nothing after. Captain Monroe leaned on the doorframe, posture casual like authority rehearsed. He said, "Systems fail," and she heard the pride hiding under excuse. Emma said, "Systems don't erase names," and she stabbed the log with her finger. His smile thinned but held, like a poker face carved from oak. He said, "You see ghosts," and she said, I see hands where they don't belong. The fluorescent hummed louder as if picking sides. Monroe said, "Don't overextend, Cole," and his use of her last name cut more than warning. She closed the log, spine cracking like old bones, and said, "I don't bend in half-light." His eyes glittered, and the air tasted metallic, like storm prelude. She knew then corruption was not whispered, it was carved into the very desk she touched. Fog bruised the alley where Evelyn Park lingered, eyes darting, breath thin. Emma said, "You saw something," and Evelyn's lips pressed shut like locked drawers. She said, "People vanish who talk," and her hands twisted the strap of her bag. Emma softened, said, "I can shield you," and Evelyn's laugh cracked, short and hopeless. She said, "Shield doesn't stop bullets," and the street lamp buzzed above them. Emma slid Laura's photo out and said, "Her silence didn't save her." Evelyn trembled, words trembling on the edge, but her gaze cut to a shadow moving beyond the dumpster. She whispered, "Not here," and bolted, shoes striking water like frantic metronome beats. Emma chased 2 steps, then froze. Footprints overlapped, fresh, deliberate, parallel to Evelyn's path. She whispered, "We're not alone," and the alley exhaled secrets too thick. Somewhere in the dark, metal clicked, patient and deliberate. Emma tightened her coat, feeling the night grow teeth. The flash drive coughed up its secrets in fragments, and Emma's screen glowed like a confession booth. She said, Laura wasn't hiding debts, she was hiding meetings, and her pen tapped against the desk like a heartbeat. The files revealed timed calls to internal affairs, scheduled under Monroe's name, redacted until peeled by persistence. Noah said she was building a case, and his voice cracked like he already feared the end. Emma whispered, "And it killed her," the words falling heavy into the stale air. The drive showed handover dates, each near Harbor Point, everyone stamped 1:58 a.m. She wrote, "Precision isn't style, it's signature," and the truth sharpened around her like glass. Jason's earlier words about Laura fearing her phone now stung with clarity. Emma said, she knew who was listening, and the cursor blinked like a threat waiting to move. Noah muttered, "This city eats its own," and Emma pressed print, paper rattling like chains. She said, "We don't chase killers, we chase sponsors," and the printer clattered as if in agreement. The archive room smelled of dust and locked doors, and Emma's gloved hands pulled a file thick with secrets. She said, "Monroe's file is sealed," and Noah said, "Nothing stays sealed forever." The pages inside were old scars, disciplinary reviews buried, misconduct boxed in legal jargon. Emma whispered, "Internal affairs knocked once," and the note dated years back carried Monroe's initials. A photo showed him, at a harbor fundraiser, Laura in the corner blurred by flash. Emma said she was already watching him, and Noah muttered, and he watched back. Her stomach coiled at the dates aligning with Laura's redacted meetings. She said, "The file isn't dead, it's just waiting," and her voice hardened to stone. The fluorescent light flickered as if reluctant to shine on betrayal. Noah said, "You'll have to choose, expose him or survive him," and Emma closed the folder with a snap. She said, "I've made my choice," and the echo hung like judgment. The diner's neon buzzed against the fog outside, and Evelyn Park sat hunched, coffee untouched, hands trembling. Emma said, "You ran because you saw him," and Evelyn's eyes filled with a fear that had been waiting. She whispered, "Monroe was near the docks the night before Laura died," and her voice cracked like brittle glass. Emma leaned closer and said, "Why didn't you come forward?" And Evelyn said, "Because he wears the badge that buries people." Noah shifted, his jaw clenched, recording quietly under the table. Emma said, "You're not alone now," and Evelyn's breath broke into shudders. She described Monroe's coat, the way he stood in shadow watching Laura walk. Emma wrote each word, ink digging grooves deep into the page. Evelyn whispered, "If he finds me, I vanish," and Emma said, "Then we keep you in the light." The neon outside sputtered, red bleeding across their table like a warning. Emma stood in the hospital's shadowed wing, and Dr. Hale adjusted his tie like he was rehearsing for confession. She said, "You warned me about chasing the knife," and his eyes flicked like scalpels. He said, "You're focused on precision, but you miss the conductor." And Emma said, "Then point me." Hale's lips curved, but the smile never reached his eyes. He said, "You think I'm clean, but I was placed near her to distract you," and the words sank sharp. Emma's breath hitched as she realized he was part of the stage. He said, "Laura wasn't just a patient, she was a liability," and his tone carried the weight of cold practice. She whispered, "And you rehearsed Mercia's murder," and Hale nodded slightly. The machines around them hummed like accomplices. Emma said, "So who held the baton?" and Hale leaned closer. He whispered, "Your captain," and stepped back into the sterile glow. Emma walked the pier alone, wind tearing at her coat, and the realization cut sharper than the cold. She whispered, "The killer isn't the surgeon, it's the badge behind him," and the sea replied with hollow roars. Monroe had hidden his sins behind Hale, using him as distraction, framing precision as a surgeon's flaw. Emma said, "Closer to the badge than the morgue," and the gulls screamed overhead. The locket in her pocket weighed heavier, Laura's last secret pressing like lead. She said Laura built her case, but Monroe silenced it, and the tide surged against the pylons. The street lamp flickered, and she thought she saw a figure in the fog, tall and patient. Emma whispered, "This city protects its predators," and her fists closed around the warrant form denied. She said, "But tomorrow, I bring the city into light," and her words carried into the mist. The fog swallowed her, but her resolve cut through sharper than the night. The sting began with a lie that fit like a glove, and Emma fed it to the city with careful hands. She said, "Leak the wrong key at the right door," and Noah nodded like a man lighting a fuse. A decoy memo mapped a midnight pickup at Berth D, and the timing wore Laura's old signature. Emma said, "Only 3 people get this," and the list etched itself like a threat: Monroe, Hale, and the clerk who never blinked. She timed the bait to the harbor's tide, because precision seduces predators. Noah said, "We leave breadcrumbs, not a loaf," and the newsroom's hum turned into a whisper. Emma placed a burner in evidence like a coin on a grave, then logged the move with a smile too thin. She said, "If someone bites, they move the cameras," and her pen tapped a metronome on the desk. The phone buzzed with a new unknown, and the message simply read, "Tonight." Emma said, "They heard the echo, and the old fear rose like steam under steel." She signed the request for plainclothes support, then tore the copy in half. She said, "No cavalry, only angles," and the plan stood up on its own legs. The voicemail arrived inside static, a voice stretched thin over a cheap mask, and Noah played it twice without breathing. He said, "The cadence is command," and Emma felt her spine tally beats. The syllables landed on the seconds like boots on parade, and a faint room tone hummed at 60 hertz. Emma said, "Substation hum, or a hospital wing," and Noah nodded toward the waveform like it might confess. The voice said, "Drop the drive, walk away," and the last word broke on the same note as Monroe's briefings. Emma whispered, "He coached it or owns it," and the room drew tight as a snare. She scrubbed the audio and found a tap of metal, a habit she had catalogued in hearings. Noah said, "Your captain chews the end of pens," and the ghost of a smirk died on his face. Emma said, "Pattern over panic," and she set the meet for earlier than advertised. Their eyes met on the unspoken risk, and the air went thinner. Emma said, "We take the voice to the water," and Noah said, "We make the water talk back." Evelyn arrived with dawn gray on her shoulders, and the cafe felt like a sanctuary that had run out of hymns. Emma said, "You're safe here," and Evelyn shook her head with a tired smile. She slid a silver locket across the table, fingers trembling like they were returning a life. Evelyn said, "Laura left this with me when the lights flickered, and the locket clicked open on habit. Inside, a micro SD hid under a scrap of ribbon, neat as a secret taught to behave." Emma said, "You kept it untouched," and Evelyn said, "I counted the days by not touching it." The espresso hissed, and Noah watched the window like it might learn to bleed. Emma said, "This turns the room," and Evelyn squeezed her eyes until the fear retreated a step. She whispered, "He came back asking for it," and Emma felt the air change colors. Noah said, "We ghost the handoff," and Emma nodded, pocketing the locket like a promise. She said, "You leave with protection now," and Evelyn said, "Protection makes you visible." Emma answered, "Not if the light stays on you," and the bell over the door braced for flight. The safe house was a rented room that smelled like old paint and decisions, and the corkboard filled with arteries of red string. Emma said, "Follow the shells," and the micro-SD answered with ledgers that did not blink. Payments hopped through charities, then vendors, then a clinic, always landing on contracts that touched Harbor Point. Noah said, "A carousel of ghosts," and the spreadsheet tightened like a noose. Emma traced the paths until two names aligned, Hale's Clinic, and a consulting firm that existed only at night. She said, "They launder precision as wellness," and the anger steadied her hand. Monroe's initials surfaced on approvals like a watermark, meant to be seen only when wet. Emma said, "He signed the rain," and the joke arrived without humor. The map glowed under a desk lamp, as if the city had swallowed a wire. Noah said, "If we publish this raw, they burn us," and Emma answered, "If we hide it, they burn everyone else." She printed 3 copies and sealed them like letters to a future that might forgive. She said, "We move the meat and own the ground." Night took back the pier with quiet confidence, and Emma walked into it with the drive that wasn't the drive. She said 2 minutes early, and Noah's reply in her ear was a breath and a prayer. The fog settled low, turning the distance into rumor, and the water rehearsed its old lines. A red dot skated across a bollard, lazy and certain, and Emma felt the world shrink to the width of a bead. She said, "We have glass high," and the answer came as a clean metallic spit against the piling. The wood splintered where her shoulder had been, and the pier learned a new word for silence. Emma rolled behind a crate and said, "Abort public path," and Noah said, echoing, voice thin with fury. A second mark scorched a warning through the mist, deliberate and disciplined. Emma said, "This is not a kill, it's a leash," and the line steadied her breath. She slid the decoy into the water and watched it sink like a lie relieved of duty. She said, "We go dark," and the harbor swallowed their footprints while the watcher waited for the script to return. The warehouse breathed like a sleeping animal, and Emma counted the beats between shadows. She said, "Wire is live," and the mic kissed her collarbone with a small cold mouth. Noah Pierce whispered, "Signal clean," and his van idled behind stacked containers. Evelyn Park waited by a side door, face pale as chalk, hands tight on a borrowed radio. Emma said, "If he moves first I stall," and her boots threaded the dust like careful stitching. A skylight leaked moon, drawing a glassy stripe across the floor. The decoy drive sat in her palm, light as treachery, heavy as proof. She said, "We trade truth for time," and the emptiness answered with echoes. A footstep tapped out authority, and Captain Richard Monroe drifted from the dark. He said, "Officer Cole," and his smile came with a funeral's patience. Dr. Victor Hale followed, crisp as a scalpel in church clothes. Emma said, "We end it here," and her throat tasted copper. Monroe said, "We end rumors," and his hand hovered near his coat. The tide beyond the wall pushed once, as if the harbor itself leaned in. Hale's voice floated like anesthesia, sweet at first and then numbing. He said, "Precision is mercy," and the words dressed themselves in science. Emma said, "Mercy does not pick a ledger," and she raised the drive until it gleamed. Monroe circled like a patient storm and said, "Your timeline is gossip with graphs." Noah murmured, audio rolling, and hiss faded under his breath. Hale stepped into the moon stripe and let it crown him with clean angles. He said, "Laura was going to rupture a fragile system," and his eyes never blinked. Emma answered, "Fragile for whom?" and her hands forgot to shake. Hale said, "For everyone we can still save," and he wore sincerity like a lab coat. Monroe sighed, bored with ideals, and tapped a pen against his palm. Emma heard the rhythm and pictured a mask over a microphone. She said, You recorded the city, then deleted its heartbeats, and silence agreed. Hale's jaw flexed once, and in that small truth, the room tilted. Monroe's coat flared as if it had its own temper, and the pen became a gun with lazy confidence. He said, "Officer Down is the story," and the barrel described a short, final arc. Emma said, "You will not write me," and slid half a step into the skylight's glare. Noah whispered, 2 meters, right side, and his voice thinned to thread. Monroe's smile tightened like a triggered discipline lesson. He said, "You forget chain of command," and the phrase landed like a stamp. Hale stayed still, admiring the geometry of fear as if charting it. Emma said, "Chain of custody speaks louder," and raised her empty hand like a mirror. The gun's front sight nicked the light and time compressed into a needle eye. She remembered Laura's locket and the soft click that meant hidden rooms. Monroe said, "Last chance to be wise," and the words felt pre-written. Emma breathed once for the life she refused to lose. The harbor wind found a crack and slid a cold finger down the back of her neck. The side door popped like a cork, and Evelyn burst in with terror disguised as courage. She said, "Police," and the word cracked the air into frantic edges. A fire extinguisher cannoned white breath across the sightline, turning the aisle into weather. Noah said, "Flash on," and a camera blinked from the dark like a new witness. Monroe swore and pivoted, blind to nuance now that sight was gone. Hale stepped sideways, precise even in panic, eyes narrowing to needles. Emma said, "Move, Evelyn," and the barista obeyed with a stumble that saved her. Foam snow ate the floor, and the moon stripe dissolved into fog. Noah's recorder caught the grunt of a misstep and the click that betrayed a chamber check. Emma said, "We own the ground," and her boot found traction on the rough seam. Evelyn said, "He's not alone," and the words shook loose from deep fear. The extinguisher died with a cough, and the warehouse inhaled again, hungry. Emma drove forward through the fading cloud, and Hale lifted his hand like a conductor claiming the last bar. He said, "Mercy," and reached for her wrist with surgical certainty. She rotated under his grip and felt tendon speak in a language older than rank. Monroe's gun came back to bear, but his footing lied, slick with foam and pride. Emma said, "Not tonight," and wrenched Hale's arm into a lever that stripped the weapon he never showed. A compact pistol clattered from his sleeve, neat as his creed. Noah shouted, "Got it," and his lens drank every failure. Monroe fired wide, round chewing splinters from a beam that refused to fall. Evelyn threw a wrench that had no right to be that brave, and it rang off Monroe's forearm. The gun popped again, a reflex without aim, and Monroe staggered as his own ricochet bit him. Emma kicked Hale's pistol away and leveled Monroe's fallen piece without triumph. She said, "It's over," and her voice did not tremble. Sirens rose like daylight, climbing stairs, and the harbor finally exhaled. At sunrise, evidence boxes left the bay, sealed and logged like lifeboats carrying truth. Emma Cole said, "Chain of custody begins here," and her pen bit the form. Noah Pierce muttered, "Audio, video, locket, clean exhaustion edging his pride." Evelyn Park hovered, whispering, "I don't want to vanish," and Emma answered, "You'll be seen right." Sirens faded, gulls returned, and the city exhaled. By noon, Hale walked the courthouse steps in cuffs, poise gone brittle. Emma said, "We cut the head, not the shadow," her voice firm under flashing bulbs. Hale said, "History is kinder than you," and Noah replied, "History prefers receipts." The press surged forward, scribbling as Emma pocketed Laura's locket. Justice at least had a face now. In interrogation, Monroe sat with his arm in a sling, pride frayed. Emma said, "You tuned the metronome," and his eyes hardened. He offered names tied to elections, each word another brick in corruption's wall. Emma said, "Then give them," and his voice cracked as the recorder captured surrender. Rain fell on Laura Bennett's grave, the locket gleaming faint against stone. Emma whispered, "You built a path through their lies." Noah said, "Your story is the spine now, umbrella trembling in wind. Evelyn placed flowers, murmuring thanks. For once, silence felt like respect. That night, Emma watched her window fog with city rain. She said, "Case closed on paper," but her reflection carried company. Across the street, a shadow paused, silent and certain. Emma whispered, "I see you," setting her badge on the table. The city waited, alive, unfinished.